A very good evening. A warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay. Thank you for joining us, where I am back in Johannesburg after a whirlwind trip down to the Cape that I'll discuss in more detail in just a moment. It did include a really exciting project that we are kicking off. You will have seen on the show over the course of the last few years, my good friend Dave Farrell, who plays bass for Linkin Park. He is a wine-loving bass player. In fact, I think he prefers wine to music. And we've done the show, we've drunk wine together, we've traveled a bit together. And so we are kicking off, because everyone else is doing one, a podcast that starts next month. Dan and Dave Go Drinking, as we initially, just the two of us, chat about our love for wine, where we've drunk it and why we enjoy it. But from then on, we will be meeting guests, or at least chatting to them wherever they are in the world, people who we've met through our travels to the Dunhill, the golf tournament in Scotland, or other parts of the world. So look out for some rather well-known people sharing their love of wine from around the world. And that kicks off next month. We recorded down at Telegraph yesterday. The estate, as are all of the winelands at the moment, just looking lovely. Perhaps not laden with fruit. There's a barren nature to the vineyards themselves, but I don't think that detracts from the beauty of my favorite part of the world. Speaking of my favorite part of the world, I have two of my favorite people in wine who join me on the show. Today is, or isn't it, International Shiraz Day. Well, the head of the Shiraz Association in South Africa is Edmund Terblanche from Motte. He will be joining us on the show to tell us whether it is Shiraz Day in South Africa, and either way to celebrate the grape. And then a very dear friend of the show who makes her return, and welcomely so, Sam O'Keefe from Lismore. And we'll be looking, amongst other things, the difference between Shiraz and Syrah. It's a conversation we've had before, but it's always a good one to have again, particularly given the nature of those two guests. So that is coming up in just a moment. We're also going to be announcing the winner of our tickets to the Cabernet Collective, Stellenbosch, descending upon the Mesh Club this Saturday. Who has won? You'll find out shortly. Before that, though, here's a quick look at some news from this week. Well, a very important Dan Really Likes Wine board meeting that we had last night at Telegraph. That, of course, is my junior director, Michael Jordan. And what was really interesting about dinner last night was an unintended pairing. Now, I mentioned a moment ago the filming, re-recording that I'd done for Dan and Dave Go Drinking, our new wine podcast, myself and Dave Farrell from Linkin Park. And the American wine, which was very kindly provided to me by Low Stradum from Ken Forrester, was a bottle of Élevage from California. There we go, that's it, the Chimney Rock on the right there. Well, lo and behold, that is also the name of a rather special wine from just around the corner from Telegraph, Michael's Bartony Farm. So we tried both of those last night. It was a 2012 Élevage, if memory serves, and a 2013 from Chimney Rock. Two lovely wines, both of them, despite the fact that they're a decade old or thereabouts, still young and fresh and vibrant, and with plenty more to say over the years. But really cool to try them out. The Élevage from Chimney Rock, about 55% Merlot, so that leads that particular blend, which, they drank differently, but both beautifully. And Michael was trying to work out whether he was proud that a big Napa name was also using Élevage, or a little myth that somebody else has it too. Either way, a lot of fun last night. And then this morning, the man with the red cap. Now, if you know Morne Frey from Telegraph, you'll know nobody in history has ever seen his head, because he wears that cap of his relentlessly. And that cap is slightly different. Now, normally it is a red cap in proudly EFF colors. Instead, it is now a soft burgundy, as you can see. And that was a change, quite a big change for Morne, as he presented me with the 2017 Lawrence Graf. Now, if the two earlier wines still had some time to go, then this one is barely walking. It is 2017, but at 5 years old, it's the type of wine that's still incredibly tight and linear. It's lovely to drink, certainly, but it is one of those wines to put away. If you can get hold of it, they only make 1,400 bottles, and they charge a fair amount for them, so they're not easy to get hold of. I think they're down to the last 300 or so, but if you can, grab it, stick it away, and come back and have a chat to it in a decade or so, and see how it's going. All right, so on to our competition. This is the Stellenbosch Cabernet Collective. I think there are still just a last couple of tickets available, and those tickets you can find at plankton.mobi. That's the ticket website. But congratulations to Karen van der Westhuizen, who is going to be heading off to the Stellenbosch Cabernet Collective at Mesh this weekend. Well done, Karen, and thank you for entering the competition. I will be there as well. We'll be filming some stuff, and you'll see that on upcoming episodes of the magazine show on Dan Really Likes Wine. Okay, let's head in to the world of Shiraz as we raise a glass to Shiraz Day. I think I need some clarification here from the head and from our other guests. So let's welcome in Edmund and Sam. Guys, lovely to have you. Welcome back to Dan Really Likes Wine, and great to have you on the show. Let's clear things up, Edmund, because if you jump onto the internet for any wine day, there are usually about 11 different options, and there's Bolivian Pinot Noir Day, and then there's Japanese Pinot Noir Day, and there's Belgian Pinot Noir Day. Shiraz, there's a 16th of February date. There's today, which is being celebrated, but then there's also a day in August. Clear up where we are in South Africa and why these different days in celebration of Shiraz.
Hi, and yes, it's a little confusing. First of all, the International Day for Syrah was announced as 16th of February. So we wasn't so happy. We were not aware of what the Australians were doing, but we were not happy as an association that it's in the middle of head summer and in harvest time. So we decided to change something, at least to have a national Shiraz Day in South Africa. We looked back into the history, and we looked at Bernard Podlashak, the guy that bottled the first Shiraz under the Bellingham label in South Africa in 1957, if I'm correct. And with the help of Bellingham and people there, we came to a date which is the 21st of August. So this will be our second year when we will celebrate the National Shiraz Day on the 21st of August. But since then, we found out that the Aussies had actually in 2020 already started a similar thing, which will be the last Thursday of every July every year. And apparently, they started off with great success there in Australia. There's a lot of going on today, I think, on social media and things around Shiraz in Australia. So we will talk around it again, but for now, we are also celebrating. So that's actually good news. You can celebrate in a month's time. You can again celebrate Shiraz.
Well, we'll do that very, very happily because it's one of many grapes that South Africa does with particular aplomb. It will be driven, particularly next month, by yourself and your association. It sounds like a really cool club to be part of. I've had visions of you all gathering once a month in a really cool cellar somewhere and opening old vintages of Shiraz and celebrating and comparing them. But I'm sure there's a little more to it than that. What does the Shiraz Association do, and why is an association like that important for South African wine?
Yes, we're not the only one. Then there's Sauvignon Blanc is a similar thing, and the people that very successfully started off first was the Pinotage Association. They're pretty big, with big sponsorships as well, with Bayer Streeter heading things there. So we are just trying to create awareness around Shiraz, or the variety that you like most. I also belong to the Sauvignon Blanc Association and the MCC Association, so there is quite a few. So we do a few things on the calendar. One important one is to judge and to announce annually the top 12 Shirazes. That's now for people that enter. There's people that don't enter these things. There's a lot of people that don't believe in any competitions. So we can't say 100% it's the top 12 in South Africa, but that's the top 12 of people that enter. But we get around the last one this year, we got around 180 entries. And then for the rest of the year, we have a technical day in November. That's sort of more for producers, where we deal with technical things of the day. We taste a lot of wine. Where we host about 100 people on that day, the producers that enter there, and in November. And we also then have this Shiraz Day, which is followed by 7 days of Shiraz and venison, where we encourage producers to be part of or create, at least have something for the week around Shiraz. If you have a restaurant, maybe in the restaurant, a pairing or something, and then some people take it up very seriously, like Cedarburg as a national-wide festival that week, which they teamed up with restaurants all over South Africa. So you can just go to a website or Shiraz SA, and then you can see what's happening. We, as an association, will sort of announce the program of all the different sellers, where all the addresses is where you can go and taste and have something special around Shiraz.
All of that clearly stems from a very personal love of the grape, and I want to dig into that a touch more in a moment. But let me jump over to Sam and do so as I look at a bottle that I've got here of the 2015 Syrah. And there are so many chapters to your remarkable and wonderful story, Sam. But this, I feel, was quite a seminal one for you, because the introduction to the world was largely through white wine when it came to Lismore and your great adventure. And then all of a sudden this Syrah arrived on the scene, and it suddenly just opened people's eyes to a completely new dimension of what you were capable of producing.
Yeah, that's pretty much describes the relationship with Syrah. And I planted 3.5 hectares of Syrah when I first planted vineyards on Grayton. And the reason that I planted Syrah is that the terroir studies that we did said we had these steep shale slopes and this very cool climate with the large, what's called the diurnal temperature shift, warmer days and cold nights. And if you looked on paper, it looked like the Northern Rhone. But in 2003, the Rhone wasn't trendy. The Swartland Revolution hadn't happened yet. And everybody was talking about Bordeaux. So we planted 3.5 hectares of Syrah, hoping we could grow something special, but I'm not quite sure what would actually happen. And when the vineyard started producing, it was 2006 and 2007. And frankly, I was kind of being told, like, you need to make Shiraz. You need to pick it really ripe. You need to, at that time, winemakers were waiting for the grapes to have old man's cheeks. And I was making this wine that just wasn't very interesting and didn't have a sense of place. And so my white wines really hit the scene, and everybody was so excited about them. And then I had this sort of vague red wine, Lismore Syrah. And within a few years, I was starting to give up. The baboons come in and decimate the vineyards at times, because it's the last grapes hanging. Sometimes I can barely ripen it because we approach winter. And I wasn't even sure that it was worth keeping the vineyards in the ground. And so as sort of a last ditch effort, I went all like cote rôtie in the cellar, started working a lot with whole bunches, and literally the wine was transformed, and my reputation with it. Instantly it became something that was special, that had a sense of place. And since then, I've really leaned in to the extreme corner of cool climate Syrah. And so that's why it took a while for people to really connect with Lismore Syrah, because as a winemaker, it took me a while as well.
Did it take you by surprise to, once you finally unlock the potential of it, to discover just what a gem you had, just what the true potential of the Syrah was?
It took me completely by surprise. The big wine was the 14 that, when it was released, it won crazy awards and was top 50 wines of the year for Wine Advocate. And as you said, not very long ago, no one cared about my Syrah. And yeah, I was excited. I knew I finally started making something interesting, but I didn't know that other people would connect with it. And so, yeah, it caught me really off guard. And I still was experimenting. You have to remember, wine has a lag time. So by the time 14 hit the market and that 15 that's in your hands, I'd made 15 a little bit different. I'd sort of pulled it back a little bit. And yeah, I just would have to explain to people, like, Yeah. I know you really like the 14. 15 is going to be a bit different. 16. It took me a while to really settle in to a style, and I think I'm there now. And as you know, I make two. I have one from my own vineyard, Sea Estate Reserve Syrah, which is very ethereal, really low in alcohol because of the site that it's grown on. And then the one in your hand is the Cape South Coast, which is from very special vineyards in our cool climate area.
You speak about having to sway people's opinions to introduce them to this wine and the style of the wine. Expand that to broader South Africa at the moment and our relationship with Shiraz/Syrah, because historically we've had lots of, I think, very nice examples of Shiraz, all big and muscular and lots and lots of wine, whereas the move to a more modern style, if you want to call it that, a wine that is more focused on an elegance and a slightly softer style of wine, we've seen come through, especially in those cooler climate spaces. Do you think it's something that the South African wine public are understanding or accepting or embracing?
I think it started, and I don't know that all wine drinkers understand why some wines are called Shiraz and Syrah. This is Atlas to everybody who just wants to say hello. He likes Syrah. Atlas, knock it off. Sorry. Okay, so I think, though, it's not regulated. So a winemaker can call it anything they want. And as long as it's made from grapes that are Shiraz or Syrah, they can call it either. So it's really an indication of style, but that's an indication of the winemaker's perception of the style that they're making. But, with me, because I'm growing such a cool climate, Syrah, it is reflective of more Côte Rôtie rather than Australia or Stellenbosch or Franschhoek. And yet, it's an implication rather than an actual definition, because, as I said, it's not a legal definition. You can call it either. But I think that the winemakers that do call their wines Syrah are trying to tell the customer that what's in the bottle is more elegant and fresh, and generally a lighter, fresher style.
It's a sentiment I'd agree with. I'd agree with immediately. My wife, who will drink a bottle of Shiraz very happily, will steer away from a Syrah because she expects it to be the lighter style of wine that she is not fond of. If we look at Shiraz in South Africa, Edmund, is that a fair observation that is, broadly speaking, the delineation between Syrah and Shiraz? And how do you guys as an organization, if not instruct, then encourage people who are making wine to make that difference?
Yes, coincidentally, last year on our technical day in November, we had this as a big topic. We had a panel, including myself. We had younger winemakers, older winemakers on a panel. We invited them to bring along two wines that they can explain and have everybody to taste, and in their mind try to explain in South African conditions what's the difference between Syrah and Shiraz. So at the end of the day, it's a synonym. Anybody can select what he wants to do with the name. You see more and more Syrah emerging on bottles, but in my experience, I cannot really see a trend that the name on the bottle is in any way connected with the contents. Some winemakers think they make, a Côte Rôtie or a Northern Rhone type of style, but then you don't experience it when you taste the wine. So you have to get to know your customers and really to see what's going on in the bottle. So myself, we also have two different Shirazes. We have one coming from Franschhoek, which you can supposedly really call Shiraz, which is from the slightly warmer climate. There's more fruit and intensity. And then we have a wine, Pygmy of Syrah, coming from a cooler climate, which is there in the Elam region, and sometimes as low as less than 12% alcohol. So it's more perfumey. I would say the warmer climate is more fruity, and then the cooler climate is more spicy and perfumey. So yes, everybody needs to find the one that he likes, and you really get You can't really connect any single style in these days to South Africa. Maybe in another 20 years' time, but I don't find it easy to negotiate at this stage.
You've preempted my next question, which was going to be on a South African style. One of the things I love about the evolution of South African wine over the last decade or two is that the let's try and make a wine in the style of somebody else approach has largely gone out the window, and we're very much making wine by and large on our own terms, reflecting our own terroir and our own winemakers rather than trying to copy somebody else. Is it a blessing or a curse that with such diversity, we've got so many different interpretations of many grapes, but Shiraz being one of them, that for people who may be finding their way in wine can drink a Shiraz one week and a Syrah the other and think that they're completely different grapes when in fact they're the same?
Yes, I think it's a blessing maybe that we can select something that works for us for the future to come, and that we can all come up with something that works for us as a team in the wine industry. But then also it's confusing for the people that need to buy the wine. If we can find some sort of a link between all of us that spells South Africa something attractive, then we can really boost the name Shiraz. Shiraz is really high up there. It's the second most planted red variety in South Africa, just below Cabernet Sauvignon. So it is quite popular, but it's if you talk to anybody, it's just more difficult to sell than the Bordeaux varieties. And I really think it shouldn't be that way, because we need to make Shiraz attractive, make people come back. So I agree with what Samantha also said, that you find more identity and a sense of place if you harvest slightly earlier. Some winemakers will say, no, you get more terroir if you ripen more. So I think to start off, I often taste wines from the 90s that is still alive and well, and they were just generally was picked earlier with lower alcohols, and there's just a self-preservative factor with the other type of tannin that you get when you harvest a little bit earlier. So I try to encourage in any tasting or wherever I go, or when I'm in wine tasting groups, I suggest that everybody should at least taste or harvest slightly earlier. You mustn't wait for that mens gesiggie, as they used to say, to appear. Yes, we have the same problem with the baboons in any case. So to save our grapes, we actually also need to pick a little bit earlier.
The challenges of being a winemaker. Let's expand on those challenges, Sam, and the making of Shiraz itself. Some grapes are a little more challenging than others. Some you can just about leave alone completely. Other needs to be nursed and cherished. Where does Shiraz sit on that scale?
Look, I actually think it's quite an easy grape to work with if you understand your vineyard. On my particular farm, as I mentioned, I just have quite an extreme cool climate. So about every 4 years, I really struggle to ripen it and to get it to even 12% alcohol. But in the good years, it's extraordinary, and it's something really special. And beyond that, it's the one thing that I often say to customers about Syrah Shiraz is that if you were to ask somebody to name like the greatest wines on the planet, somewhere on that list will be Chave Hermitage, which is this ethereal, perfumed, elegant 12% alcohol wine from Côte Rôtie. And somewhere on that list will be Penfolds Grange, which is 16% alcohol, 300% new oak. And yet they're both considered the greatest wines in the world. And to me, what it tells you is that Shiraz can grow the greatest wines in the world in a diversity of climates. And that makes it really well suited to South Africa, because we have cool climate, we have warm climate, we have extreme, desert conditions. And a winemaker who respects the place that they're in can make something really great with the grapes that they grow. And I think that's what makes Syrah special and so diverse. And it's so cool that all of a sudden out of South Africa, when I'm standing in the international markets representing South Africa, I can tell them, like, we have a Syrah on the spectrum of every climate that we grow, and we're making great wines across the board. So I think I hope it answers your question. I actually think if you respect your site, it's quite an easy grape to work with. It's not as difficult as others.
It almost sounds a little ethereal, but I get the sense that something we're doing increasingly in South Africa is listening to the grapes. But with Syrah, Shiraz in particular, if you do really listen to them, if you let them develop, grow, turn into wine on their own terms with minimal intervention, you're going to get the very best out of them. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what I'm trying to say. And what's so fun is that there's a diversity of techniques now. A lot of young winemakers, I work heavily with whole bench fermentation, leaving the stems in the ferment. Other winemakers, they completely destem, varying oak formats, small barrels, big food, aging it in concrete. I mean, it's really, really thrilling what's coming out of cellars right now. And it's a grape that you could make some really fun wines with. And it gives us all a lot of room to just really showcase, what we're doing and the kind of wine we want to share with our customers.
A moment ago, Edmund was talking about some wine from the early 90s that was a lighter style, lower in alcohol, that had aged really well. For the wine you're making, particularly the estate Syrah, does that apply as well, that it is wine that we can keep, that we can look forward to drinking a couple of decades from now?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, that wine sells out so quickly. And when I show it, it's still so young. I think it needs at least another 10 years. And I mean, it's beautiful and it's delicious now, but you're really going to get depth and layers and really see the pages of a book start to separate with time. So, without being too technical, when you have wines that have a lower pH and a high acidity, they're able to really hold it together for a long time. So yes.
All right, that's wine in the future. Let's have a little bit of a history lesson as we're talking Shiraz and go back to our head of the Shiraz Association. Edmund, would I be right? It's Bellingham and a rather well-known gentleman called Bernard who gave us our very first Shiraz in South Africa?
Yes, Bernard, if Podlashok, is that the correct pronunciation? I'm not sure, but yes, he was a wine man in many ways. He also, I believe, he was the first guy to bottle a South African rosé as well. I don't know a lot about his history, but regarding Shiraz, Australia know who brought the first material to their country, and that was a guy called James Busby around about 1840. And we had the same visit by the same guy. In that time, he passed Cape Town on his way to Australia, so he could have offloaded some Syrah here. I sometimes think that he couldn't pronounce Syrah because it was a Scotchman. Maybe he had a few whiskies and he said Shiraz instead of Syrah. So that's why South Australia used Shiraz and we use Shiraz, or we started off using that. But it could also have come to South Africa, in the Simon van der Stel days. We're not sure. What we do know is that we have confirmation that the first Syrah plantings was on Groot Constantia in the 1890s. That's the only confirmed info that I'm aware of. And then in the old days, the Cape wine competition. Around about 1935, I think there was about 15 entries that was called Shiraz. Of 12 of the 15 was sweet wines. So in those days, the sweet styles was obviously more the things that they were after. But nobody bottled it as Shiraz. As we said earlier, Bernard Podlashuk bottled in 1957 the first wine that they named Shiraz. I think a little bit later, Groot Constantia bottled the Shiraz, and then 1965, I think the co-op up in Claver, they bottled the Shiraz, and in 1968 they had 10 Shirazes. In 1978 there was 20, and then it just boomed from there on. In the 90s, between 2000 and 2010, Shiraz was definitely every year the most planted grape variety in South Africa, and it quickly went from 900 hectares in, I think, 1978 to 10,000 hectares in 2010. It's going slightly down, like most other varieties also. We were at 103,000 hectares in South Africa. We're standing now at 92,000 hectares and still going down because it's difficult times in South Africa, but who knows what's the future. But that's a little bit of the history that I know around Shiraz and Shiraz plantings. It's very much a similar picture in the rest of the world. You know, before 1960, there was, I think, less than 100 hectares of Shiraz in France, and it was all eradicated by the end of the 1980 with the phylloxera in those days, and then it came back after 1960. Australia had success after that, and then today's France have 70,000 hectares of Shiraz. And the ones that we talk about the most, the Northern Rhone, is only 3,000 after 70,000 hectares. So yes, we're the fourth biggest planter of Shiraz after France, Australia, and Argentina recently overtook South Africa in terms of hectares. So that's the Shiraz picture in the world.
It's a fourth largest producing country, not just because it makes out and out Shiraz, but we've got plenty of blends in South Africa. Tell me about an interesting one that you did, a very popular one that you do, Edmund, and that is taking your Syrah and adding a splash of Viognier. People might raise an eyebrow. Hang on, Viognier is a white wine. What on earth is it doing in a red wine blend? Why that? And what is the Syrah Viognier connection that allows this wine to work so well?
Again, we looked at the French. I worked there in 2004. It's only then that I really got to know the area and how it fits in together. The Viognier area, the two appellations dedicated to Viognier in France, is sitting there right amongst the Northern Rhone Shiraz appellations, Condrieu especially. And I think the French, just over the years, by accident or whatever, some Viognier ended in the tanks, and they liked it and went on with it. And today they can use up to, according to appellation rules, they can use up to 20% of Viognier in a blend. And it's not as if they pick it in another block and bring it together. It is planted amongst the Shiraz. So you allow 20% of your vines in the vineyard might be Shiraz, and then only a third of this 140 hectare Côte Rôtie area is as that do that, and it's more from 3 to 7%, and not really 20%. Very little people also know that you can add white varieties in the other appellations, which is Hermitage and Saint-Chef, the other areas. They can also add, but in their case it's Marsanne and Roussanne. But very little people do that. I think with the Viognier, the result is such a perfumey wine if you make it on its own, and that sort of goes parallel with the cool climate Shiraz perfume that I mentioned earlier. You have those rose petals, and then you have in the Shiraz, and then you have Viognier that have jasmine type of flowery perfume, and I think it goes well together. And then they also did some research in the University of Davis in California. I believe that they really proved that the tannin in some white wine varieties have the tendency to sort of stabilize wine color. So it actually helps you, even though you add a white variety with the red variety, the white variety's phenolic makeup, those grippiness in the white skins helps to stabilize and actually make you more stable, darker red wine. That sounds a little bit awkward, but that's what the facts say. So we also experimented with it, and these days, I only use it in the cool climate grapes that we're getting from Elam, and I think it definitely helps with making a more complex wine at the end of the day. I shouldn't say all the areas should do it, but I think there's room for it.
Well, a space to experiment and play around and discover, one of the many, many beauties of wine. Does that fit into the Lismore perspective? Is there still experimentation going on, Sam? Is there the possibility of a Syrah blend, or is there new stuff you can see yourself developing as the years roll on?
I definitely experiment every single season, and the reason that Viognier is planted on Lismore was because when we did the terroir study and it looked similar to the Northern Rhone, we planted a lot of Syrah and a tiny bit of Viognier as a possible blending component, which is why the Estate Reserve Viognier is so limited, because it's actually such a small block. But as far as co-ferments, my favorite co-ferment out of Côte Rôtie is a wine called the Bassanon by Yves Couillon. And so inspired by him, I did try. On Lismore, the Viognier and the Syrah ripen too far apart, so I wouldn't be able to do it with my own fruit. But with Elgin fruit, I, for 2 years in a row, did a co-ferment. And it was really fun to make. And it was very nice. But in the end, I felt it didn't quite justify its own bottling. And so I just think that the Syrah and the Viogniers that I produce are just better off in their own bottles. But I have experimented with it, and I do find some examples in the world just absolutely stunning.
There's just so much to explore, so little time and so much wine to drink in that time. I'm going to ask you both in a moment for some recommendations on the menus that you would prepare. Not if, but when I come around to visit you both and we're having a bottle of Syrah, a bottle of Shiraz with you both, and what you would serve up with them. What I do want to ask you though, Sam, before we go into that, you mentioned the difference between 14 and 15. Since then, is every vintage markedly different, or have you now settled on something that, bar a few changes in rainfall and temperature through the year, is reasonably similar to what's gone before?
Yeah, it's a great question. 14 and 15 were probably the most diverse and being very different from the styles that were produced before them. But by 16, I'd settled in. 16, 17, 18, and beyond, I very much have settled into a style. And I look for vineyards that, are grown, my Cape South Coast are grown on shale, a huge diurnal temperature shift. That's why Elgin is really where I go to find more fruit. You do see a continuity of style. I'm going forward. I generally work with about 50% whole bunch with different batches of 100% here and there, extended maceration for a month. Very little new oak on the Cape South Coast Syrah, to really let the floral elements and the perfume speak for themselves.
And by extension, you have to make wine not just to your preferences and to the styles you like and to what your terroir affords you the opportunity to make, but you've also got people who want to buy it. You need to sell the wine. Where is the line between the people who are always looking for something new and something different, and then that group of people who, I want my 14 to taste like my 15, to taste like my 16. I've hit on something I like, and it's up to you as the winemaker to keep delivering on that preference.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we're all running businesses, and most of us, they're small businesses, and that's exactly the consideration that we have, and I think that's why the Cape South Coast Syrah does so well, because the Elgin fruit, in particular, there are a couple of vineyards that it's just more grounded than the Estate Reserve. The Estate Reserve is quite ethereal and quite geeky, and not for everybody. The price point also isn't for everybody, but I just think that the Cape South Coast wine can just be really rewarding, and although it's exciting because it's cool climate and it might be a unique expression, it certainly isn't difficult to understand. And we do have to think about the customer, and so I think now that That's why I thought I'd overdone it with 14. It did win lots of awards, but it's not the kind of wine that a lot of customers would connect to. And so with 15 and 16 and beyond, it's a bit more tethered to the earth. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask about exactly that wine in a moment for the food we have with it, but let's put that question first to the head of the Shiraz Association. Right, Edmund, I arrive with my large family for dinner. What are you feeding us, and is there a particular vintage of La Motte that you'd like to give us for dinner?
You just mentioned 14 and 15 there. I think accolade-wise, the most successful wine, you mentioned the PNF, was our 2015. So that was a great year, and the wine is keeping up well and fresh. So yes, probably to show off, I would take out the 15. And did you ask food as well, or is it only the vintage? As Samantha said, we don't have, huge differences in from vintage to vintage like in Europe, but really, if you focus and zoom in on one block, or you know your blocks, and you focus on one variety, you really see big differences. And like in some years, if you picked the same sugar level every year, you will have really a different wine. So it's always a gut feel thing every season. I give myself as much as possible toys to play with. So we do a few harvests, even if it's one block, you harvest in different weeks in order to see where you picked, and maybe learn something from that in order to get to the future. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. But yes, vintage 2015 at this stage.
All right, and with that vintage, what's on the menu? What's for dinner?
I'm going to choose that 15 that's in your hand, not because it's necessarily the best, but because it's what you've got on hand. And I'm going to give them a surprising pairing, because I think people always think of red wine and just a piece of meat or whatever. I find that Syrah, the lighter style, the more floral style Syrahs, goes so beautifully with warm aromatics. So even something like buttered chicken and Syrah, it sounds random, but it actually enhances all the layered aromatics in a cool climate Syrah, in a cool climate Syrah. It's a stunning pairing.
Oh, that does sound good. I'm partial to butter chicken. I make it myself, so maybe that is that is one to try. So I'll try it myself, but I'll also have it when I get to Lismore to come and have dinner with you, Sam. What about your food, Edmund? What would you pair for your Syrah?
Yes, I keep a lot of wines handy. The best all-rounder is probably Chardonnay. So if the Shiraz don't work, you'll take out something else. But yes, we're lucky in South Africa with, I read Katinka Vanikak's little book, and interesting, she referred to any action that you take to brown meat, being it grilled, barbecue, fried, or that browning action. That's something that Shiraz hooks onto. It's a friend of Shiraz. And then also we have a venison culture, goes with venison. And then very often we put on some of these sweeter relishes, and that's one. Shiraz is one red wine that can deal with that if you have a little bit of a warmer climate, Shiraz, and a few hard cheeses. But yes, if I think Shiraz, I think of my days there in France. The first little restaurant I got to, the owner asked me, I wasn't sure what to take, and everything is French. So he asked me if I play rugby. I said yes. I said then you eat cassoulet. So I met cassoulet, and when I came back to South Africa, I digged into a few books and came up with a South African recipe where you, in fact, instead of pork sausages, you just use boerewors, and you make a South African cassoulet with lamb and boerewors and duck, or even some other bird or whatever, and that's a sumptuous, big meal, or slow cooked meal, and a Shiraz goes with that as well. So I will give you a 2015 Pinot of Shiraz with a South African cassoulet.
Well, that sounds fantastic. I love that. A South African cassoulet with boerewors in it sounds terrific. Wonderfully South African. And that pairing does sound delightful. Edmund, I want to wrap up in a moment, just get a sense of where you think you'd like to see Shiraz, Syrah headed in South Africa the next few years. But a last question for you quickly, Sam, and that's to the new hotspot in downtown Greyton. If you're sweeping through the CBD of Greyton, there is a new tasting room that's getting rather a lot of attention.
Yeah, we opened a tasting room in the city of Greyton, so you don't have to slog out on the dusty or even worse, muddy, potholed roads to get up to the top of the mountain in Lismore. It's a gorgeous, thank you for that. It's a gorgeous space in the oak and vine courtyard. You can sit outside under the trees and drink wine and enjoy the Greyton, peace and solitude, and watch the horses and the donkeys walk by down the middle of the street, because that's how we roll in Greyton. So yeah, everybody's welcome. It's open every day except for Tuesdays and Sundays, and you will often find my son and my assistant winemaker, and sometimes you might even catch me there. So yeah.
Just as important, you'll find lots of Lismore wine. So if the sound of Sam Syrah has caught your attention, then make it a destination to get to. There's also some fairly decent white wine to be found as well. Edmund, as we wrap up today's Shiraz Day, but also look forward to another more quintessentially South African Shiraz Day next month, where is Shiraz/Syrah headed? Where would you like to see it going? And what do you think as a wine community and as those of us who drink Shiraz? What do we need to do more of, know more of, be a little bit better at?
Yes, the farmers like to farm with Shiraz. It's not a difficult variety. It reacts very well to our conditions. We make attractive wines over a lot of price levels. So I would just like to see that it ends up where it rightfully belongs. The figures, the planting figures, must also reflecting the sales figures. So that's what we try to do as an organization, and also where I'm working at Motte, it's very much our premium product. I would like to see it in more homes, and we will try and also try to give direction to the farmers and to the winemakers and young winemakers, and what type of styles we must head for, which will sell South Africa the best and be the best wine on the table. Hopefully we'll get there, and we'll keep on going. We're still growing in numbers with members, so Shiraz is supposed to be up there with the sales of likes of Cabernet and Merlot.
Remind us quickly, Edmund, the date for next month's celebrations and what people can do, where they can go, how they can be part of it.
Yes, 21st of August. That's on a Sunday this year. Every year on the 20. Maybe we should make like the Australians and call it the third or the fourth week or Thursday or whatever, Friday or Saturday. But at this stage, the 21st of August, they can go to. We will give away, obviously, the case of Shiraz on social media. So I'm not so technical with the social media things, but the hashtag is a National Shiraz Day. You can go to that, or hashtag 7 Days of Shiraz, and then you'll find the links and things. And we gave away wines last year, and we'll do the same this year. And also, Dan, we can also maybe if you, again that week on your show, talk about Shiraz, we can also maybe get some Shiraz to your office, which you can also give away to your listeners.
That sounds like an excellent idea. Always happy to drink and to give away and celebrate South African wine, and particularly when it is one of the wines that we do so well in South Africa, and a wine that we do in so many different styles, which for me just broadens the sense of adventure around it. And here's your challenge from me as we build up to 21st of August. Go out and seek, get down to your local Pick and Pay, visit some of your wine estates, get some Shiraz, get some Syrah, get the 2 different names, and then see what those different styles are like. And you'll find there is just such a wonderful range of interpretation and expression that comes through one single grape that pays tribute to the terroir, it pays tribute to the climate, but it also pays tribute to the quite wonderful winemakers who collectively are a national treasure in South Africa. And Sam and Edmund are very much in that space. Guys, thank you both so much for joining us. Sam, I will be through for some butter chicken and a visit to the new tasting room just as soon as I can. And Edmund, that South African Castellet sounds sensational. Count me in. I promised Hein I'd be visiting soon. So get the kitchen ready and I'll let you know when I'm touching down.
Okay,
thank you, Dan.
So there we go. Edmund Terblanche, who heads up the Shiraz Association in South Africa, and Samantha O'Keefe out at Lismore Estate in Greyton with a canine co-star on occasion on this evening's show, talking through what today the Australians have labelled Shiraz Day. We have our own one coming up in August, and there's one in Europe in February. I think what's more important, though, is grabbing the opportunity to celebrate South African wine whenever we can, and if we can distill that focus down to a particular grape on occasion, then all the better. So make sure you have some Shiraz in your glass this evening, and do so through till August, a nice glass of Syrah, and celebrate that, and celebrate this weekend, because I might see some of you down at the Mesh Club for the Stellenbosch Cabernet Collective. Speaking of Stellenbosch, I'll be joined on Monday's show by, amongst others, Mike Ratcliffe, as we look ahead to Winetown in Stellenbosch. That is taking place next weekend. It is a huge celebration, and Mike, plus a couple of chefs and winemakers, will be giving us a guided tour of what lies ahead in Stellenbosch, which is absolutely pumping. I was there this morning. There's such an energy to the place, and that energy transfers to Johannesburg this weekend. I also might be seeing some of you in about 5 minutes. I'll be online with the Pick and Pay Wine Club team as we host an evening with Alvy's Drift, Alvy and Janelle, pairing up some wine with Jonathan at Sourced Food, doing the meals. And that promises to be another terrific hour. So I will see you then if you're part of that. I will see you at the Mesh Club on Saturday if you're drinking some Cabernet Sauvignon in Johannesburg. And if neither of those, then I'll see you on Monday evening with Mike Ratcliffe and the Stellenbosch team on Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay. Huge thank you to Edmund and to Sam. Enjoy your evening. Happy drinking. Goodbye. To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.